We hear in the gospel today the scribe asking Jesus, what's the most important of all the commandments? There's so many commandments in the covenant and the law of Moses. What is the most important? And this is a normal question to be asking of a rabbi. This was something, in fact, there was a saying, recite the whole Torah while standing on one foot. Basically, just can you recite it? Can you get to the nub of it? What's the most important part? And so many rabbis would have come up with lots of different answers. And so Jesus goes back to the Shema. The Shema is what we heard in the first reading today, where Moses speaks about how we are to love the Lord of God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Take to heart these words which I enjoin you today. And he continues on about binding them upon your wrists and upon your forehead, teaching them to our children, putting them by the doorposts so that we remember this most important thing. There's so many different laws out there, but it all comes down to loving God. This incredible gift. There's a story about one of the rabbis in Israel during the Roman persecutions. And they were told, because when people were teaching the Torah, that then people would uprise and all these things, and Rome didn't like that very much. And so they were told, stop teaching Torah. And there was this one rabbi who kept teaching, and he kept teaching, and his disciples were saying, you're afraid? You can't, why are you doing this? He says, I can't help but teach the Torah. This is life itself. He was eventually captured by the Romans, and he was tortured. He was put on a spit and slowly burned to death. At that time, as a good Jew, you would recite the Shema 3 times a day. And that time for that to come came as he was on this spit being slowly burned to death. And it was then that he started to sing the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. And his disciples said, you're going to be doing this now while you're being killed? He says, never in my life have I understood what it meant to love the Lord with all your soul. Now I know. And as he prayed the Shema, he died. People he recognized in that moment what it meant truly to love God with his whole soul. And the Lord invites us, he says, God is not just something you do once a week when you come to Mass. It's not just something you think about maybe when you get up in the morning and you have your morning prayer, or an evening as you're going to bed. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. But the Lord is inviting us to recognize he is the most important part of our lives. Why? He's God. He created everything. He wants relationship with us. He wants us to do everything in relationship with him. And so that then affects how we treat the people around us. For Jesus said, the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That these 2 commandments make up all the law and the prophets. This is what it is all about. And if we segregate and separate our lives out, we have our God part, our work part, and we have our family part, and we have our free time part. And if we separate all these things out so they never touch, we're missing out. Because the God part isn't just supposed to be over here. It's supposed to encompass everything. And for instance, when we go to the polls this Tuesday, now don't think I'm going to tell you who to vote for. I can't do that. But have you asked God? Have you invited God into that decision? Have you said, God, who do you want me to vote for? How do you want me to exercise my civil duty? What is it that you're asking of me? And surrendering it into his hands. The Lord is inviting us not just to see him as one thing among other things. He's not the icing on the cake. He's the main course. He's the steak and potatoes. He is everything. Do we recognize God as being part of all of our lives? Or do we put off and say, well, what I do with my phone, that's one thing, and God is over here. How I spend my free time is one way, and God is that other part. What I do in the bedroom, that's one thing, and how I spend my time over here with God, that's another. Everything needs to be subject to what? Not just to God as Lord and enforcer of all things, but as the Lord who loves us deeply, tenderly, intimately, passionately. He's calling us to love Him with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, to love our neighbor as ourselves. When I think about my own life, when I think about how I am called to love and how frail I am in loving, how weak I am in loving, I recognize I can't do this on my own. How can I love my neighbor as myself if I barely love myself? How can I love God with all my heart, soul, and strength if I'm always turned in on myself? And the Lord is saying, I want you to come to me so that I can perfect your love. One of my favorite passages in all of the Bible, John chapter 21. In John chapter 21, it's after the resurrection. Peter and his buddies have been out fishing again, and Jesus is on the shore and he makes breakfast for them. They come in with the great catch of fish, and Jesus makes breakfast for them, and then he asks Peter 3 times, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And the first time he says, do you love me with agape love, that total love, that self-sacrificial love? And Simon responds, Lord, you know that I love you with a very human friendship type of love. And Jesus asks Peter, do you love me with a perfect, divine, self-giving love? And Simon Peter says, Lord, you know that I love you with a human love. And the third time, Jesus asks, you love me with a human friendship type of love. Peter is greatly distressed and sad, and he says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you with a human love. Peter, after his 3 trials, is not able to give everything. And so God comes down and meets him where he's at. And then he says, when you were young, you used to go where you wanted to. When you grow old, someone else will lead you where you don't want to go. Of course, St. John tells us that's signifying the kind of death he's going to die, where he will give God that agape love, self-giving, self-denying love. God will lead him there. And he will lead us into the love that when we know how weak and small and selfish and self-centered we are, if we invite him in, he will help to strengthen us, to expand our little universes so that we can love him with his own love. And when we come to Mass, Jesus himself, the high priest, offers himself as the sacrifice on this altar. And he gives us the total godly love to the Father from the Son. He says, you get to participate in this. And so if you're thinking, like I very often do, yeah, I don't love God with my whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. I barely love myself. The Lord is saying, let me be that love within you. When you come to receive the Eucharist, let me be that perfect love. Borrow my love to love the Father. And so we come to Mass not just because it's the thing we're supposed to do and we have to go to confession if we miss Mass on Sunday, but because we enter into the love arrangement with Almighty God, where he gives us all of his love to infuse within us to love the Father. May we open our hearts, may we open our souls to the perfect, infinite, tender, passionate love of Almighty God, so that we can finally live up to those commandments, to love God, to love neighbor.